Meanwhile, in neighbouring Syria, the strengthening of al-Qaeda-linked groups has led to growing infighting between once allied rebels. Fierce clashes between rival opposition factions have killed at least 700 people this week. Almost 100 of them are believed to be civilians who were executed by militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. Now, the outbreak of a civil war within a civil war has prompted some Western politicians who previously rooted solely for Assad's removal to change their stance. Now, here are just some of the latest statements we've heard. The former CIA director, Michael Hayden, said the Assad regime is beginning to look like the lesser of all evils. And the former US ambassador to Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, he's agreed that Assad is not as bad as the jihadis. And Russia has long been warning of the threat some opposition groups in Syria pose, with Foreign Minister Lavrov welcoming the realization of this in the West. Well, infighting within the ranks of the Syrian rebels is threatening the Russia-US brokered peace conference that's due in less than 2 weeks from now. The world's top diplomats are in Paris to pressure Syria's main opposition group, the Syrian National Council, into taking part. Well, let's discuss what might come out of it with Michel Chizadovsky. He's director of the Center for Research on Globalization. He's live in Berlin. Michel, so these Western leaders there, they're all undertaking a last-ditch effort to persuade the Syrian National Council to take part in these forthcoming talks in Geneva. Will they succeed?
I think the fundamental issue is to address the nature of the conflict. The Syrian National Council is virtually a defunct organization. They've been meeting in Spain, in Cordoba, Spain, with other opposition groups. But in effect, we have to ask the question, is this a civil war between opposing factions within Syrian society, or is it, in fact, a war of aggression? And I think at the moment what is striking is the fact that there's a merger of the insurgency in Iraq and Syria. It's the same al-Qaeda affiliated organizations, al-Qaeda and the Islamic in Iraq and the Levant, which are waging war, I say waging war against both countries. And then the question is, who is behind them? And we know that these are intelligence operations. We know that Saudi Arabia is supporting those rebels. And we know also that the United States now is supporting the new Islamic Front, which was created back in November, which is considered to be some kind of moderate grouping of Islamic organizations. But in effect, there's ample evidence to the fact that the Western military alliance is supporting the various Islamic rebel forces.
And yet the Western leaders are now becoming very aware of the consequences of what's happening, aren't they? It's interesting to hear that many are suspecting now that Assad might be the lesser of all evils, as we just heard a little earlier. And yet, today's Friends of Syria meeting, that was a very different a message coming from the French foreign minister during that meeting. He said the following. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Contrary to what has been stated, we don't have the Assad regime on one side and terrorists on the other. It is the regime that is fueling terrorism.
So Assad's regime is fueling the terrorism. What do you make of that?
Well, these are cynical statements. The Western military alliance has been recruiting mujahideen right from the outset, and it's confirmed by numerous and reliable sources, including Israeli intelligence. These jihadist forces are operatives of the Western military alliance, and it's a continuum right from the Soviet-Afghan war. So that for the West to say that Assad is allied with the terrorists and so on and so forth, I think is a red herring. They are still intent upon destabilizing Syria as a nation state, and in fact, one has the impression now that with the situation in Iraq and Syria, that in fact what they want to do is to redraw the map of the Middle East.
Yeah, but surely everything you're saying is being contradicted by the fact that the West are holding a peace conference in Geneva. It wants peace in Syria.
Yes, but that peace conference to be held, scheduled for next week in Montreux, it really is an exercise in shadow fake diplomacy, because ultimately decisions will not be taken there. They'll be taken behind closed doors between John Kerry, Sergei Lavrov. But very important, Sergei Lavrov made the statement back in November, I believe, that the Geneva Peace II talks should focus on counter-terrorism. Now, that raises an issue because they'll be sitting at the table together, and then the question is, who is behind the terrorists? There'll be a number of countries, there are 30 countries there. I suspect that Saudi Arabia might be present at those meetings in Montreux. But then who are the sponsors of these terrorists? Who is feeding them the weapons? And we have ample evidence. I mean, just a few months ago, Senator John McCain had a photo op shaking hands with leaders of terrorist organizations inside Syria. So we must understand that the Western military alliance also has blood on their hands. It's not simply an issue of identifying terrorists. We have to identify the people who are behind these terrorists.
All right, let me just ask you quickly then, with these interesting signals coming from Western leaders and Western spokespeople, what do you make of Assad's future now? Many are saying he does have a lot of support within Syria. Could he actually ride this out?
Well, I think that Assad has support within Syria because the Syrian people realize that this is a war of aggression with mercenaries coming in, and these mercenaries are coordinated by special forces. They understand that. And when you see the situation in the massacre that took place recently in Adra, well, the civilian population understood that who came to the rescue? It was the Syrian armed forces against these terrorists. I think it's shocking to say the least that the massacres in Adra were not covered. They were covered in some media, including the Russian media, but they were not covered by the Western media. Well, of course, there's a lot of speculation indeed about the verification of that particular report, and that's obviously ongoing. So, but in the meantime, we'll have to leave it there. Michel Chislovsky, Director for the Center for Research on Globalization, live in Berlin. Thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah, we've just heard an RT interview from Michel Chislovsky, Director of the Center for Research on Globalization, and now we have an update and comments from Johnny Achi from Arab Americans for Syria. Welcome, Johnny, to KPFK and Freedom Now.
Hello, Dedon. Thanks for having me again on the show.
Great. We had a couple of interesting points which I've observed in the media recently. That number one, Kerry and the French Foreign Minister has put forth this analysis that Assad and the Ba'athist Party has produced terrorists and aligned with the terrorists, which is so far from the truth. And that this notion of a peace conference in which 30 countries involved and the peace conference have nothing to do, most of them had nothing to do with the situation in Syria, but yet Iran is expelled from attending the conference, this notion of fake diplomacy. And number three, that Assad has growing support inside Syria due to the foreign forces being supported by foreign government, forcing Syrian nationalists, even those who disagree with Assad, to in fact align with Assad and the Ba'athist Party because they represent the national interests of Syria. Can you comment on that and then give us an update on what's happening in Geneva II?
Absolutely. Hopefully I have a few more minutes because this is going to be, a lot of good points to talk about. Starting off with the report that you just played, which is really great because we've been talking about this, Dedon, on your show for 2 years. I'm glad to hear more and more voices are coming to the realization of what is really going on in Syria. Geneva II, where he left off, he said, yeah, the Western-backed countries have now brokering a peace agreement in Geneva. No, they brought us to Geneva based on the deal that was brokered by the Russians, the Syrians, and the Americans after the false flag operation, if you remember, on August 21st, about the chemical attack. And that United Nations resolution, when Syria agreed to turn in chemical weapons, actually we had requested that to avoid this false flag operation. We insisted on Geneva too. We insisted that part of that resolution there was a mention that we will have a peace conference for Syria. So yes, the Americans did, or the West-backed countries have brought us to Geneva. However, the idea is bringing us here does not mean we are going to come out with a peace conference. What I'm seeing is this more of a war conference than a peace conference. The diplomatic process was never intended to succeed or to bring about a peaceful solution to this war. The main purpose was always to affect the strategic objective of the United States and the country is the removal of President Bashar al-Assad from power, and the disappearance of Syria as we know it today as an independent state. Kerry, till today, he's in Geneva II right now. He knows what everybody is coming to. He's still talking about the removing of Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian delegation, and it's time to say something, a moment of truth here, that systematically the Western media has tried to hide or bury underground, is that this delegation of the Syrian represent all of Syria. They represent the Syrian Arab Republic as a whole. They represent the Syrian people, the Syrian government, the state of Syria, the Syrian army, and the President Bashar al-Assad. So what we have here is not pro and con Assad Syria on the table. No, we have Syria with its allies from Russia and Iran and China and the BRIC countries against the enemies of Syria. The enemies of Syria played by Israel, the United States, and the British and France and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We must mention these names. They are represented by these individuals that they call them to be opposition. These are not Syrian opposition. They are hand-picked people by these governments to represent them on this war conference that we're having. What conditions can Syria give to end this war? Syria wants to end this war. Our demands from Geneva I are very clear. Ceasefire. Bringing humanitarian aid to the areas that are under siege. We have a lot of areas in Syria. The latest was the Yarmouk camp, the Palestinian Yarmouk camp, which the Western media played it to be, again, a different scenario. We have militants, foreign jihadists inside the camp preventing the food and the aid to enter. We have two towns. I've talked about it in your show, Dedon, maybe a year and a half ago. They've been under siege for almost 21 months. Nubul and Zahra in northern Syria. Because I have to say it, they're Shiite towns. They're not allowed any food in any town nearby that present or give them food. They've assassinated a lot of those kids that are trying to smuggle food into this town. These videos are there. These towns have been under siege for almost 2 years. Aleppo is under siege by these militants. The only city that's under total control under their name is Raqqa. And we know how this town turned out to be. An Islamic state. It's an Islamic Imara. This is what their control is about. So what we're seeing in Geneva II right now, a group, individuals presenting foreign interests and foreign powers against the whole Syrian population presented by this delegation. And I must also say that this delegation, Dedon, a lot of people think there's a civil war going on in Syria. I'm not going to say the sect of these delegations, but I can assure you they are all from the majority sect in Syria, okay? So no one here is talking about sectarian. Syria is a secular government, and the people who are right now in Geneva II defending the secular government and secular country are all Sunni Muslims. Okay, we have to mention. Sunni Muslims, without the Sunni Muslim population of Syria, Syria would not have lasted. So the 70% population of Syria, their majority are backing the Syrian government and the Syrian army against these foreign Wahhabists. These are Saudi-backed militants who do not represent Islam. They give a wrong impression of the Islam. The true Islam is in Syria. We belong to true Islam. Grand Mufti of Hassun of Syria is the true Islam, and they are standing all in front of these Wahhabi Salafist jihadists backed by Saudi Arabia and the United States, actually.
Johnny, if we monitor the media in the last couple of days, we found former CIA Director Michael Hayden and former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, Ron Crocker, saying that Assad and the Ba'athist parties are lesser of the two evils, indicating that there's a possibility for rapprochement between the United States and the Syrian government. Yet at the same token, Kerry, the French Foreign Minister, Hillary Clinton, among others, are calling for basically all-out war. How do you reconcile this apparent contradiction within the State Department and within the United States decision-makers?
Okay, the good cop, bad cop routine, we've seen it many, many times. I understand, though, however, that there is, differences between when you come to the State Department and between, for example, the Pentagon. This is not the first time we hear high representatives from the Pentagon say, we're not going to fight this war in Syria. This is not our fight. And when Kerry, however, comes out and said, we are demanding the removal of Bashar al-Assad, what he is realizing, and he knows that if Bashar al-Assad government is gone, the Syrian people will have to live under totalitarian, fundamentalist Wahhabi rules. There is no but or if about it. That's why Kerry said, we will protect. He had the audacity to stand in Geneva when the whole world is listening. He said, we will take care of the minorities in Syria. Who are you? How much did you take care of the minorities in Iraq? 1 million Iraqi died. A whole civilization of a Syrians and Kildanis have disappeared. They've been there for 7,000 years. They were never threatened until the American army went into Iraq and dismantled the Iraqi army. So when Kerry stands up and say, I will take care of the Alawites and we take care of the Christians, don't worry, let Assad go. No, sir. The Assad and the Syrian army is what defend us, not the American army who might come in way too late. We, like again, I say it, we have Raqqa as an example, the only province out of the 14 under their rule. Why isn't anybody doing anything about it? Women cannot sit in public. They cannot sit on a chair. They're not allowed to drive. Worse than Saudi Arabia. Nobody is talking about it. Okay, there are three big important lies that the Western media and the United States continue to talk about. That they're saying we went to Geneva II based on Geneva I communique, which sees the removal of Bashar Assad. That is a lie. It has been repeated over and over by the United States government and the media here. It has zero basis. Okay, the communique does indeed call for a negotiated political transition, but nowhere does it state that such a transition cannot include President Assad. Okay, such a condition would have been outright rejected by Syria. And we know, we came to the table, and if you see our delegation, how they speak from a strong back, because for 2 years, from Geneva I until Geneva II, we have not changed one bit of our demands. We demand a ceasefire. We demand, aid to go to the seized area. And thirdly, and most importantly, we demand the whole world to back us up in our fight against this international terrorism that's plaguing Syria. The second lie that the United States and the media continue to talk about is that US-backed rebels militants are moderate Islamic groups. My friend, there is no moderate Islamic group. They're all militant. They just have different names. The moderate rebel lie was further exposed recently. Okay, there was Ahrar al-Sham, a powerful militia, which was under the Free Syrian Army that the United States considered to be moderate. Ahrar al-Sham and the president declared to be the real representative of al-Qaeda in Syria on their website. And they have been in all over the media except the Western media. So there was nothing left of moderate. We cannot continue to say moderate rebels. We have terrorists funded by Saudi Arabia and the United States, and they are using these are the boots on the ground. These jihadist, Wahhabist terrorists, and from Saudi Arabia and al-Qaeda, the United States, unfortunately, has forged an alliance with these Wahhabists to be the U.S. boots on the ground in Syria, and that needs to stop. So, I hope that, the Geneva II will get something out of it, which is, yes, we did sit face-to-face. Today, they sat down for about 30 minutes. Of course, it was just Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi who took over. He spoke for 30 minutes, and they broke up into different rooms, and Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi is going to be shuttling back and forth between the two parties. We just hope that, the world is starting to realize what we're up against, and we hope that we've put enough pressure on the United States and Western powers to leave Syria alone, stand for peace, to truly try to end this war, and to put an end to terror in Syria as well.
We thank you, Brother Johnny. We fully support the right of the people of Syria to self-determination with free, fair elections, monitored by international bodies. Let the people of Syria decide whether they support the Bashar Assad and the Ba'athist Party or these terrorist groups that are claiming to represent the people of Syria. We thank you very much.
Thank you so
Johnny.
much.
We've just heard from Johnny Achi from Arab Americans for Syria.